Hello, guests. Geoff and Kate are away this week. It's just me, but something special this week. A one-on-one interview with Dimitri Pantazopoulos, noted pollster and campaigner. We'll title this episode "The Greek and I," or maybe it's "Take Me to the Greek." In any event, we're going to cover the territory. But first of all, who is Dimitri Pantazopoulos? Well, I don't have time to read his bio. It would take me about 5 minutes. So I went to ChatGPT, and here's what it says. Dimitri is one of Canada's top strategists and public opinion researchers with over 25 years of experience advising corporate leaders, industry associations, and political figures. He's overseen hundreds of research projects across Canada and the U.S., combining deep expertise in public opinion with hands-on campaign strategy. Dimitri has played key roles in major political victories, including campaigns for Stephen Harper, Christy Clark, Andrew Wilkinson. I had to add that ChatGPT didn't have Andrew Wilkinson in there. Jason Kenney, and Doug Ford. He's based in Vancouver with his long-suffering wife and his 5 children. Dimitri, hello. Finally, you've come to the Hotel Pacifico.
Yeah, well, hello, Mike. What took you so long to invite me anyway? I've been waiting for this invitation forever.
I couldn't get through the chicken pen to find you because there were so many feathers flying every time I came looking for you, but finally you've decided.
Well, truth be told, I didn't want to really join the show because I thought it would just be all nerds, but then I saw Adrian Dix and Aaron Gunn on the show, and I thought I'll fit right in.
You'll fit right in. Well, hopefully you will be more succinct than Adrian, but we shall hope. Anyways, I mean, the other bio point that I didn't mention is that it's almost our 15-year anniversary since you were lured out to British Columbia in 2010 for Christy Clark's leadership campaign, and you never left. You decided to stay.
I tell people you stole my passport.
You stole, yeah, we wouldn't let you go back to Ontario. So today we're going to cover a few things in the interview today. We're going to talk about the public opinion landscape and campaigning and what's changed, where things are going in the future. We're going to talk a bit about the federal situation and what it's going to take the federal Conservatives to win a national election. And then we're going to talk about the provincial situation and what a roadmap for a BC Conservative government looks like, according to Dimitri. But let me just start with a question. What do you like about politics? Why do you do it? You've been doing it for a long time. Like, why is it? Is it an addiction? What is it?
Oh man, well, I think when I started out in politics, I had this view of politics as being a way to influence public policy, and I really liked public policy, and was interested in trying to make change and so forth. And I think I eventually got to the point where I think I don't know how to do anything else, so I just keep doing it. Every time I do a campaign, like in 2017 when you and I were on the Christy Clark campaign, I said that would be my second last campaign. I told Christy, I said, I've got one more in me if you want to run again, and that's it. I'm not doing another campaign. And I think since then I've probably racked up
5, yeah.
10. No, actually closer to 8 or 10 if you count leadership.
Okay.
Yeah, you didn't mention John Rustad either in your little intro.
Oh, sorry.
GPT.
We gotta. It's usually a couple of years behind.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's always a surprise to me when political people like us actually find gainful employment. That actually skills are transferable to the outside world. So good for both of us that we've managed to make a living somehow, despite this lifelong addiction we seem to harbor. But you've been involved since a young age, working in politics, and polling as well. And you've been polling for probably 30 years?
30 years,
yeah. So what have you seen change over that time? I mean, there's been a lot of change. You've ridden various waves over the years, populist waves, conservative waves that have come, and tide's gone in, tide's gone out. What strikes you looking back on it, what's really changed in Canadian politics?
Well, I guess first of all, I just start out methodologically and say that, in 30 years, I remember starting out in the business in 1992. Sorry, 1994, in polling. And in those days, long distance was 25 cents a minute. So doing a survey actually cost a lot of money. Like a telephone survey cost a lot of money. Not only did you have to pay the callers, but you had to pay all these long distance fees for, people to hang up on you and so forth. And we did everything by fax or by modem with a 2400 baud modem to transfer the tables and the data and everything. So, we've come a long way methodologically where it's a lot easier to get data. And I think part of that's good because we're getting more data. Part of it's bad because I think we get a lot more bad data as well. But in the world of politics, I think the biggest change has been the ability of people to actually become involved and active in politics in a very significant way, using democratic tools like the internet, like this, like these, a podcast like this, X or Twitter or whatever we call it these days, is another forum. So for better or worse, there's actually a lot more political communication that takes place, a lot more hot takes, and things move a lot quicker. So we went from the 24-hour news cycle in my lifetime to, we used to talk about a Gainsburger, right? Every day you'd have to give on a campaign, you had to give the media a Gainsburger. Remember that, the old hamburger, the dog food patties or whatever they are. And now we've gotten to the point where you have to respond instantly, or Donald Trump takes the weekend off and everyone assumes he's dead because he's like not tweeting every 3 seconds, right? So those are I think the biggest changes that have taken place.
But I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm overly nostalgic about this, but going back 30 years, it seemed like there were more people involved. Like there were maybe more people present in campaigns, or people active in the communities. There was a deeper network compared to today. While more people may engage with politics online and through social media commentary, they're not necessarily showing, lending their good name to a political party like they may have in the past. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think maybe it's just an evolution, right? Just as so much of our world has moved online, so too has politics. And we used to do a lot more door knocking and town hall meetings and so forth, and now we do a lot more digital communication with voters and meet people in fora like this. And other ways, and it becomes also 24 hours where you didn't have to wait till Thursday at 7 for the town hall meeting. You can have a town hall meeting any time of day or night, and you can have an argument, a political debate with somebody any time of day or night.
Yes, it seems sovereignty has a new political salience these days. I mean, I didn't need an excuse to eat more Hawkins cheesies, but geopolitical conditions have certainly given me an excuse these past months. So let's talk about data sovereignty for a minute, because OpenText and TELUS recently announced a strategic partnership aimed at delivering Canadian sovereign AI-powered solutions tailored for governments and businesses. This collaboration integrates Canadian infrastructure, advanced AI innovation, and advisory services to provide a unique, sovereign solution for the Canadian market. The partnership between OpenText and TELUS emphasizes the importance of data sovereignty, ensuring that data remains within Canadian borders, which is crucial for government and business sectors concerned with data privacy and security. And the solutions leverage cutting-edge AI technologies to enhance operational efficiencies, decision-making processes, and overall digital transformation for clients. By combining TELUS's robust infrastructure with OpenText's cloud capabilities, the partnership offers agile and scalable solutions, which is something to celebrate with a Canadian treat of your choice. Go on, ketchup chips for sovereignty.
Well, let's just talk about polling for a minute. You mentioned at the outset that the good old days of phoning people, long distance charges, and it was a lot of people would participate in surveys back then. In fact, you knew where they were too, because basically you could tell by your phone prefix where people lived. If it was 604, it's going to be Lower Mainland. If it's 250, it's going to be the interior. And even the next 3 digits, you could tell if it's Vernon or Kamloops or whatever. Now everybody's everywhere on mobile phones. It's hard to pinpoint, if you want to do a survey in a particular community, it's a little bit harder. And people are resistant to taking the call now compared to yesterday. And that's forced, or it created opportunities as well for online surveys that are different methodology and other forms of surveys now. So where do you think it's going in the future in terms of how to collect information?
So first of all, maybe let's just address where we've come from. I know you love when I get involved in these nerdy conversations about methodology, but notwithstanding the limitations of telephone and dropping response rates and so forth, telephone still remains, in my view, the most accurate way to do a survey, live telephone, that is, with the live caller or whatever, the voice agent.
Obviously using mobile phone.
Yeah, you have to use the landline is ostensibly dead.
Yeah.
But in terms of the other stuff, response rates drop. But we have 40 million people in the country, and as long as on a national survey, as long as you've got enough people answering, and as long as the people who answer aren't different than the people who don't answer, we don't have a problem. And so far, we haven't really seen that problem. The difficulty of finding where people live, that's a little bit more tricky. But keep in mind, like, most people don't move. Most people, die within an hour's drive of where they were born. So the issue of mobility, we know, and particularly in politics, we're almost like traveling salesmen in this business. A lot of people move around to a lot of different places, but most people tend to live where they are and stay where they are. So it's a bit more challenging, especially if you try to get into something more granular, like doing a survey in a riding. But it hasn't really changed that much. Now, online research has improved, and it's continuing to improve. I was not a fan of online research, and I say online research is good enough. It's not great, but it's good enough now. But the challenges we have now are professional panelists and bots and just the lack of volume, the lack of size of panels to actually recruit.
Right. Same people doing multiple surveys, right?
Exactly.
Sure.
I'll give you an example here, Mike, for a second. Sorry to interrupt, but during the federal election campaign, in the last weekend of the election campaign, we did a little bit of a survey just to kind of find out where people were at, and we wanted to kind of understand voters post-election. And one of the questions we asked people was, we did this online survey, and we asked them over the past 4 weeks, how many surveys have you been involved in? And it was a significant majority, and I apologize because I didn't prepare by looking up this number, but it was something like 70% had responded to 5 or more surveys in the last 4 weeks. And it was at very least a majority who had responded to 5 or more surveys. So there's a lot of people who do surveys, a lot of surveys.
And they have a lot of influence because they're the ones we hear from.
Totally.
And just one last nerdy point. I mean, you do see a little bit of a difference between, say, an online survey and an IVR. When you do a lot of the public polls that come out during election times are IVR polls that are for our audience are automated dial, press the button to respond, usually pretty short surveys. And sometimes you see them having a different take than an online survey. And that's partly, I think that is just the nature of the sample that is being collected. Would you kind of agree with that?
We could have an hour-long conversation on this topic alone, but I think what I would say just in summary is IVR, these robo-dial kind of surveys tend to attract people who are older and lower socioeconomic. Online surveys, interestingly, have started to skew older as well, but I think there's some aspect to how people are actually recruited to these panels. They're actually recruiting consumers, not voters. If I call you and I ask you a question on, I say, hey, can you respond to this political survey? If you're not into politics and you're not going to vote, you say no and you hang up. And that's actually a feature, not a bug in the system. Whereas online surveys, like if I give you 25 Aeroplan points or whatever, 5 air miles or whatever, would you respond to a survey about politics? Well, how do we discern if that person is actually going to vote or not? Because they're being motivated by points or cash or something of that nature. So it does change things a little bit. And we've seen, when you look at the last couple of elections, IVR has been slightly more accurate than online.
Well, in 2013, in the campaign, we worked most closely together. There was a lot of commentary after the election that the pollsters got it wrong. But we knew what was happening inside the campaign. And basically, I think at that time, the polling, most of it that was out there was wrong, is because they weren't factoring in voter turnout. And in that particular campaign, older people were trending very hard towards BC Liberals. Younger people were more inclined to the NDP, but the younger people didn't show up to vote as much as the older people. And from an internal campaign perspective, that's something all internal pollsters have to do, is figure out actually who's actually going to show up to vote.
Yeah, that's why we get paid the big bucks, right? Like,
Yeah.
well, mediocre bucks. Um,
That's why you get all the glory.
but but in terms, this is actually, by the way, one of the interesting and fun and nerve-wracking things about being a political pollster on a campaign is that everything rides on your results, right? Like
Yeah.
if you do a survey for RBC or something, you're a pollster, you do a survey for RBC and you say 42% of people have a favorable impression of you. How's RBC ever going to figure out whether or not that's accurate? When you do a survey 2 days before the election and say you're going to get 37.6% of the vote, we do tenths of a point, we get 37% of the vote. If they get 47% of the vote, you never work again.
Yeah.
So it's a high wire.
Well, the public polls are everybody's consuming them outside the campaign room. So it creates a reality that is really hard to dispel if you think they're wrong. Um, Now, in that particular case in 2013, I think we actually made it just work for ourselves by, keeping expectations managed. Um, and the NDP didn't wake up to it. But I can recall, instances where you presented numbers to me and I just didn't believe the numbers. And
They,
they were right. I can think of Comox in 2017. I was just like, there's no way we're losing Comox because everything, all the boundaries had changed to our advantage, and it had been a good seat for us. But lo and behold, the NDP squeaked away with it
and south
famously.
of the Fraser in that election too, right? Surrey,
Yeah,
we thought everyone was like, our numbers were not good south of
yeah,
the Fraser, and everyone thought the numbers were wrong. This is
yeah.
actually one of the most challenging parts, I think, of being a pollster is that you have to be the most
To be dispassionate
person,
about it. Yeah,
dispassionate person in the room. And I'm not, well, first of all, I'm not dispassionate. Anyone who knows me knows that that's the opposite of my personality. But keeping your emotions in check and what you want to have happen in check and being objective about things is actually the hardest part of the job. The numbers
yeah,
are the easier part of the job, but everyone can like look and go, oh, I think I saw a little uptick in the numbers, so it's taking off. We're going to be great, and you have to be realistic, and it makes you kind of the jerk in the campaign when everyone's celebrating, or it looks like you're celebrating the loss because you're pointing out the fact that you're doing badly or something of that nature. But in that campaign, I just remember you and I sitting at the Joey's the night before election day, and we were looking at what was going on in the public polls, and we said, I remember telling you this. I said either we're going to be right or I'm going to be working at Best Buy tomorrow. And fortunately, I've got a blue shirt on, so I could probably go there, and I like electronics,
you do
so
like your technology.
I do like my technology, yes, but
Yeah,
yeah, not working at Best Buy yet.
yeah. No, I mean these are all. Yeah, it's the numbers can drive you crazy, but we do the polling for a reason because it's
Mm.
usually right in terms of if you're doing it properly.
And you have to believe it. You have to believe it
Yeah,
until it doesn't until it's not true, right? Because
yeah.
otherwise, right, you're spending a lot of money to do this, and if you're just going to say, well, that's not right, then why bother spending the money?
What's the deal with cold plunges? They're pretty popular right now. I don't get it. They're trendy, invigorating, and apparently they build resilience. Who knew that taking cold showers to save money on heating would turn into a wellness craze? Luckily, for me, saving energy doesn't mean giving up hot showers. Across BC, thousands of people made their homes and businesses more efficient last year, and it was all possible thanks to our sponsor, Fortis BC. And the impact? Pretty impressive. In 2024 alone, with the help of rebates, Fortis BC customers managed to cut their gas and electricity use enough to lower emissions by almost 1 million tons. How did that happen? Through insulation upgrades, energy efficient heating and cooling systems, and money saving rebates. Even local producers got in on it. Canoe Forest Products in Salmon Arm is just one example. They manufacture plywood, a key material for retrofits and new builds, and are slashing energy use while boosting business. So go ahead and leave the cold plunges to the spas. Check out the rebates at fortisbc.com/rebates. Fortis BC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast. Well, let's talk about campaigning now. Let's talk about you've been in a lot of federal and provincial fights over the years, and you've seen parties rise to power, fall from power, or not quite make it. Um, what does it take for a party that wants to govern? What does it take to win? Like, what is it? what are the key ingredients that you think that get parties over the top?
Organization, first of all, is a big one. And I wouldn't consider myself an organized person, but you need someone in the campaign who's organized. You have to have a plan, and you have to have a message, and you have to have strength and determination. A strong leader can go a lot further with a lot less than somebody who's a weak leader. And when I say strong or weak, I mean physically maybe, but because you have to have a bunch of physicals, you have to have physical stamina to make it through the campaign as a leader, but you also have to have the emotional and mental energy to be able to stick to your guns, even if you don't think it's working. Like, I'd rather lose in an unprincipled effort in a principled effort than win in an unprincipled effort. And where you've got leaders who know what they want and are trying to figure out how to get there and how to move the public with them and take that on, you have a much better experience, and frankly, in my experience, a better outcome than somebody who's trying to sort of quote unquote game the voters and say, well, people will never buy this, so I'm just not going to do it, and they sell out their principles. And it's hard to overstate that, because you think that the cynic's view is that politicians listen to the polls, and the polls tell them what to do and what to think and how to act. And that does happen sometimes. But the better situation is where a politician has principles, and the politician wants to understand where the public is and how to bring the public along, and what's missing in their understanding. So having that ability to take those views and expound on them and move people along, and people read it. They read sincerity, right? There's instances I've seen over the years where you see a candidate, whether it's someone you work for or someone on the other side, and you go, you see something in them that you wonder if the voters see, and then they lose or win, and you say the voters saw through that person for better or worse in those instances.
Mm-hmm. Well, like a winning party, depending on whether it's federal or provincial, will need at least 40% of the vote. Now, sometimes more. In BC, it can be 44, 45% needed to get the job done. Federally, it's higher based on the last election. And when you get over 40% of the public supporting you, it means you actually have a lot of disparate groups within your own voter base that, are hard to keep together. And, I think one of the key ingredients of winning these days, has always been the case actually, is how to get people to get along within your political party, and what's the glue, the unifying force, that keeps it going. Sometimes it's fear of the enemy, or something worse is going to happen than what we could possibly do ourselves. But what's your reflection on that? Because you've been through a lot where you've seen, when you saw the progressive conservatives fall apart and the Reform Party rise, and then it all came back together again. What were some of the hard decisions that were made to make it happen?
Well, I think a lot of it, this comes back to my comment about strength in leadership, because part of strength in leadership is actually being able to understand different points of view, hear them, and accept some of what they're saying, and maybe putting a little bit of water into your wine. Like, we live in a democracy. You don't get 100% of your way 100% of the time. Where I think we've seen success over the years is leaders who pick their battles, who understand that, sometimes what you believe isn't necessarily what the public wants. And rather than changing what you believe, maybe you focus on other areas where you can be more effective. In terms of like where I've seen leaders bring things together, like, Stephen Harper was a good example of that, right? Stephen Harper, I first met him in 1991 working for the Reform Party. It was my first job, and people don't realize he and I actually sat across from each other at a desk, and he went a lot further in life than I did, but oh well. He was somebody who at the beginning was seen as being someone who was rigid and
policy wonk.
So we're policy wonk. In 2004, we lost the election. We got 99 seats in that election. The transformation from 2004 to 2006 was partly organizational. He made large changes to the organization and I think, improvements to the organization, but he also broadened the organization, deepened the organization. And to win double digit. I think it was 11 seats in Quebec in 2006, from a guy who started out in the Reform Party in 1988, I guess, or 89 in his case. He was 88 or 89. That was representative of somebody who understood and was willing to listen and accept and so forth. And it showed in his success. Like he's a very principled person, but I think also somebody who was willing to adapt and listen and broaden the tent. And when you looked at what he ended up with in a caucus and in a cabinet, even when he became prime minister, it was very different. And if you recall 2008, when they almost brought down the conservative government at the time, he prorogued Parliament, rejigged his strategy, and then came back with the throne speech that actually, I guess, lifted a fair amount from the opposition side. Similarly, Mark Carney in this last election, as much as I didn't like the outcome, Mark Carney proved in that case to be astute enough to lift entire segments out of the conservative platform and swallow previous liberal policies whole in order to achieve success. Now, I think that was probably a little bit more on the cynical side than on the principled side, but he was adept at
well, it's a case study in a way, and I think Christy is perhaps another version of this, is where if you are going to succeed a leader in your own party, you need to look very different. You usually, if that previous leader's been in for a while, you got to show a different look, because the voters generally have an impulse for change. They generally, I think, especially when a government's been around for a couple of terms, you better look a lot different than your predecessor if you want to stick around. And the Alberta Conservatives have been kind of classic at this over the years, moving from one leader to the next.
But Mike, you'd think that the broad strokes would stay the same, right? We're for the carbon tax before we're against the carbon tax, and we can just go through the list of all of the places in which they swallowed themselves whole, including now on trade. So we see where that ultimately will end up. I think at some point it will end up not in a good place for him, but right now it's still working for him. So we'll see.
BC's public services are stretched right now. Maybe you've noticed. We care about the work we do, but the high cost of living means outreach workers like me can barely make ends meet. We can't turn the tide on the mental health and addictions crisis when we are juggling multiple jobs and facing burnout. If we want to get public services back on track, BC needs to invest in frontline workers.
A message from members of the BC General Employees Union, BCGEU.
Well, let's get to federal politics. Well, I mean, it was obviously a tough loss for the Conservatives in April, especially after the expectations were so high for so long that they would win. The popular vote was impressive for the Conservatives. It has been said many times, if everyone had said that Poilievre would get whatever it was, 41% of the vote on election day, people would assume it was a massive majority. But the NDP collapsed. So where do the Conservatives go here from, moving forward in terms of winning next time? The calculations completely changed, it seems, with the NDP completely collapsing. There has to be a different way of winning, it seems.
Well, I think there's, look, first of all, let's not assume that the NDP are going away, right? They may go away. I think the longer the Liberals are in power, the less likely the NDP are to stick around. So it's kind of in the NDP's interest to get their act together and have an election as soon as possible if they hope to hang on and regain party status. But I think that in terms of what will happen in the next election, patience is part of, I think, what's required in order to sort of let things breathe and let things kind of grow out and let the consequences of the decisions start to fall into place. We've seen early signs of this with elbows coming down and the entire trade policy of this government turning almost 180 degrees from where it was 4 months ago. These decisions will take time to bite. I think from the Conservative standpoint, you have to adapt. Obviously, like any party has to adapt to their opponent, who their new opponent is. political parties and leaders often make the mistake of fighting the last campaign, and that's winners and losers who do that, follow the path of the last campaign and don't necessarily end up in a good spot. See, they're diligently washing the windows behind me. I hope you'll
I know,
ignore
I see that. I just can't get enough of this podcast.
they're probably eavesdropping. But adapting to the situation and realizing that Carney's a different person than Trudeau, and he's running a different government than Trudeau is. But at the same time, I think also inherits a lot of what Trudeau started. So, what do they do about the deficits, and what about industrial development? Does it actually happen? There's talk of this major project office. We don't need a major projects office. We need major projects, right? Like, this is actually what we need. We don't need another bureaucracy. We need actually like policies in place to encourage investment and growth in the country. And I think that's ultimately where we're going to see.
Psychologically, it's tough for any political party that comes out of that situation. And you can liken it to a sports team that was hoping to win the championship and fell short. It's tough for the followers to deal with the defeat sometimes and then rally and come back. And you and I have been through that on our own in the past. What's the most important thing? You mentioned patience, but are there other factors that the Conservatives need to consider in terms of kind of rallying their own troops to say, okay, we're going to run it back here and get everyone excited again?
Well, I think patience, preparation, hard work, all of those things, you can't substitute them, and also keeping an eye on the ball in terms of where things are evolving in terms of the issue landscape. Right, we'll be a year or 2 or 4 years from now in a very different position than we were in last year. Will Donald Trump be president? I mean, he may be. Maybe after the next election, maybe he does pass away between now and then. He's not a spring chicken, right? Maybe something else happens that we don't know. And what's Carney's experience? Remember, he was elected to some extent as the person who could actually deal with Donald Trump. And remember, at one point they talked about him being the Trump whisperer, and I think the Liberal parties and the spinners were spinning that out as though he can talk to him as a Trump whisperer. And I suspect that didn't go over well at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, saying, oh, so basically what you're saying is you can manipulate me. So these are things that we'll have to keep an eye on and adapt to the evolving circumstance that happens in the world, in Canada and the US. And
Would you be surprised if Carney goes to the polls next year?
No, I think one of the challenges, number one, is he will want a majority government. So if he feels he can get a majority government and he feels he's prepared, he made a calculation last time. I don't think they were adequately prepared for that campaign, and I can get into why. But I think he would rather strike while the iron is hot and be less prepared than spend a whole bunch of time preparing and then missing the window of opportunity. Secondly, I think that the one thing that Trudeau had going for him, which Carney doesn't, and it's similar to Horgan and Eby, if you want to talk about provincial stuff, is that they both had, Horgan and Trudeau both had the luxury of having a dance partner that could get them over the top. Horgan and Trudeau. Whereas both Carney and Eby don't have that luxury, and Carney needs to have at least one, if not two, different dance partners on any given day in order to pass legislation. I don't think that works for an effective for effective governing and getting your agenda passed. And I think if he wants to have his agenda passed, he's going to eventually hit a roadblock that's going to cause him to have an election.
Mm-hmm.
He may orchestrate it as well, right? But,
yeah, I mean, we talked a few minutes ago about coalitions and holding them together, and Carney has taken the Trudeau coalition and completely turned it upside down in terms of the policies. And certainly making business liberals very happy, but some of the more, left-sided liberals are probably feeling a bit discombobulated right now because may not have been what they signed up for.
Yeah, well, and Trudeau reshaped the party into something else. So the question is, to what extent does that party still exist today?
Yeah, and there's always has been that tension in the Liberals, but we'll have to see how it evolves. I mean, right now Carney's probably still in honeymoon phase, so see how long he can extend the honeymoon.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go provincially. And last year, you were involved to some extent in the BC Conservative campaign, and it was like a bit of a fever dream coming out of the summer into the fall, especially with the historic meltdown of BC United. And but for 3 seats, there would be a BC Conservative government. Like, what, looking back on it, you know, what happened?
What happened, good or bad? Well, I think
Well, like,
first of all, I give
what led to the Conservatives almost winning? Like, what did you see in public opinion and on the ground underlying them almost, you know, making a
well,
shocking win?
I think so. First of all, let me back up to before I even get to the public opinion. I think the undeserved, not undeserved, unknown or underrepresented factor in this was actually John Rustad himself.
Hmm.
I sat down with John in like May of that year because I knew him a bit as we both did from our time in government, and um, but not extremely well. And I went for a coffee with him to find out what was going on and what he was thinking. And he basically mapped out the path from May to election day for me over the course of a cup of coffee. And I would say the trajectory that he laid out in terms of the people that he would bring over from the BC Liberals, or BC United as they were then called, to how he would deal with the NDP, pretty much mapped on with the strategy that happened. And so you give him, hats off to him, because
Was that around the time you decided to move over?
yeah, yeah. That's why I met with him. I wanted to see what this guy was made of in terms of, like, he seemed a nice guy. I didn't have a problem with him, but I wasn't sure what was going to happen or what I wanted to do, if I was going to do anything, to be honest. And we had a really good conversation where he kind of mapped out, well, this is what I'm thinking of doing. And I remember telling him I totally underestimated you, and he laughed at me and he says, well, I like it when people underestimate me.
Yeah.
And I think that's a
Do you
mistake.
still underestimate it?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So what happened then, public opinion wise? Number one, David Eby's no John Horgan. He doesn't have the same appeal and the same warmth, I think, that Horgan had, and I think that's true internally in his party, and it's true externally. And I've met David Eby a few times. I find him a perfectly nice person. Wouldn't agree with him on a lot of stuff, but that said, I'm not his target audience. Then I think when you look at what happened, the public, the Polyev effect was actually had an impact at that point in time too, where people had had enough of things like carbon taxes and liberal policies and the liberal approach, and there was a bit of a conservative wave federally, and that we got some spillover, some of that aura brought onto us. And the third thing I would say is I think that we had a good campaign message overall throughout the campaign. It was actually a reasonably well-run campaign, despite the fact that we started with like almost no money and very little organization and a tour plan that wasn't really that fleshed out a couple of weeks before the campaign, and so forth. On the why didn't we get over the top? I mean, I think part of that is, again, some of the limitations of being a new party, right? That some people didn't play well with others. Some parts of the campaign weren't prepared. The NDP did a good job on some things. I don't think we did a good job of highlighting the team, which we actually, I think, had a very good team, a combination of experienced people who were competent and served the party well, people like Peter Millibar, and newbies who were younger and enthusiastic, or even older and enthusiastic, like Kyle Giddens or Leo Warabus, and represented a very diverse and different party than had been.
We had Claire Rattay on the pod last week, and she's young and
another
interesting.
An atypical, not the stereotypical person that you would see, not your parents' conservative party, right? So
yeah. So new blood made a big difference.
Well, I'm saying we should have highlighted
no baggage.
That more.
Yeah. Well, you didn't have the baggage of, I mean, the BC Liberals were around for a long time, and as much as I would like to argue the accomplishments of the BC Liberal era, you always have baggage that weighs you down, and the Conservatives were able to turn a fresh page. Now, going forward now, there's the element of surprise isn't going to be there. The Conservatives are positioned to be the main contender to the NDP. Asterisks, no one knows what's going on with BC United, if it's ever going to rise from the grave. But assuming it's an NDP Conservative binary fight with the Greens nipping at heels, and the one party, I assume, is just, will fade into oblivion after the next election. What's it going to take now?
Well, I think that, yes, there's not the element of surprise, but I think at this point in the BC Conservatives world, we have a much clearer roadmap than we had. When you look at the electoral roadmap of the last election campaign, it wasn't just a direct mapping of BC Liberals onto BC Conservatives. We took some NDP ridings. We did really well in Surrey. We didn't perform as well in some of the urban areas. So we know now we've got a bit of a roadmap as to where we fell short in the campaign a little bit. And that allows us to create targets. It also allows us to create targets, in terms of ridings, but also targets in terms of demographic targets, in terms of who we need to attract and what the shortcomings are. Also have a campaign team that's more experienced and because a lot of these people who were on their first campaign ever will now be on their second campaign, and other people who didn't want to play last time will want to play this time because they had some preconceived notions and so forth. And so it will be, I think, a better run, better organized, and better planned campaign than I think we saw last time around. In terms of challenges, there's always the unknowns in terms of in politics. So.
Well, I can think of three distinct phases in my career with the BC Liberals where when Gordon Campbell became leader, there was almost like a leadership campaign to go out and recruit Socreds to come over in advance of the 96 campaign. Didn't quite get over the hump. Renewed the efforts, went out and got BC reformers to come over prior to 2001. That helped. That worked. Big win. And then, in the third term, when Christy came in, the party was on the ropes. You especially, were very involved in going out and getting people that didn't feel like the BC Liberals were still representing them. And we did Free Enterprise Friday and other events that sent out, put out the welcome sign and did enough to get by in that election. I'm not sure I see that from the BC Conservatives today, that the welcome mat is out for non-Conservatives, or people who haven't been part of it so far. I mean, am I misreading that? Like, I'm not saying like go out and get, the federal Liberal riding president, but I don't necessarily see the big tent vibe happening.
Well, Mike,
Conservatives.
I'm glad you raised that because that's something that I've had to address through the years, right? So I came out to BC and worked for the BC Liberals. I've been a lifelong reformer and conservative, and my friends in conservative circles would say, "Oh, you've become a liberal right now," and I'm probably more conservative than most of them as well. But we worked under the assumption that the BC Liberal Party was the BC Liberals were the Conservatives as a coalition, right? The Free Enterprise Coalition. Yeah. And I talked to some of our Liberal friends, and they say the same thing to me in reverse. They go, "Oh, I just don't think I could ever vote for a Conservative." My response to them is when the Free Enterprise Coalition was called the BC Liberals, I, as a Conservative, supported them. Yeah. Now that the Free Enterprise Coalition is called the Conservatives, it's incumbent on free enterprise-oriented Liberals to swallow a little bit of their pride, just a little bit, not too much, and actually support a conservative party that represents the broad free enterprise coalition. And if you look at what's happened in terms of, don't look at what you're seeing on Twitter from the NDP Twitter feeds. Look at what's actually happening and who the BC Conservatives represent. They're representing working people. They're talking about healthcare. They're talking about investment in LNG. They're talking about, basically growth of the economy, crime and justice, all of these things. We can disagree with the carbon tax. I disagreed with the carbon tax when we were the BC Liberals. It's one.
Everyone disagrees with it now. Apparently.
Yeah, everyone disagrees with it
even
now.
David Eby.
Yeah, I was just a little bit ahead of you, Mike, on that one.
Yes, you were ahead of me on that one.
But no party is ever going to take on 100%.
My point though is I do not disagree with you that it's fair cricket for, the Conservatives to have the lead role here in terms of what we perceive as the coalition, and for it to be called conservative. That's fine. I totally agree. Conservatives had to swallow the name Liberal for a few decades. But I just say I don't see the charm offensive. I don't see the level of effort coming from the BC Conservatives towards moderates in the political spectrum. And one of my proof points would be just the doubling down on backing the federal Conservatives in federal elections. That's not something the provincial wing in the BC Liberals would have done in the past, to go out and be partisan at a federal level. Yet, many MLAs and the leader got behind Poilievre, and it turned out it was not a winning horse.
Yeah, well, I guess, people
I'm
will do
entitled to my
what they
opinion,
do,
I guess.
but you are entitled to your opinion, even when it's wrong. Yeah, fair game, but fair point. But I do think that, we're going to look at, running a provincial campaign, not a federal campaign, and people will be what they want to be federally, right? Like perhaps
Yeah.
some of the Liberals within the caucus, within the BC Conservative caucus, and support would be or should be supporting their Liberal counterparts, and I think that's perfectly fine. We don't have an affiliation in that respect.
Well, as I said on this pod a week or two ago, it's like you got one job. It's win the provincial election. Forget about federal, forget about municipal, laser beam focus. So anyways, so you almost won the election with basically no organization. And as we talked about earlier in the pod here today, political parties are kind of a different nature than they used to be. So are we now looking at political parties that basically head office is hiring 93 sales agents to go out and run? Or would it be better for the political party to basically have 93 franchisees who are out building something in their riding under a brand, but trying to, you give up something from head office when you have strong regional organizations because they don't always agree with central command, and you get some strong-willed people. But right now it seems like we're going the direction of, we'll decide who runs, and if you don't like it, we won't sign your papers. So
Yeah, well, I think there's sort of two polarities in that question, and I think the reality is somewhere in between, that there has to be some room for some flexibility at the candidate level for candidates to do what they want, but they can't have that flexibility at the expense of tanking the entire party with them, and frankly, that that happens sometimes. To your point, sometimes the local franchisees upset because they can't execute a good idea. Sometimes they're upset because, unbeknownst to them, they can't execute a bad idea. So, there has to always be a balance, and it's possible to be too far on one side or the other. But there is a broad spectrum in between. My personal view is that the candidates, and we've seen this through many electoral studies, the candidates account for a small portion of the vote and a small portion of success, but they can account for a disproportionate part of the failure. Right? Like, you can think of things like, I'll bring up a humorous one, a guy peeing in a coffee cup, right? What kind of impact did that have on an entire, displacing an entire national campaign?
which campaign was that?
The Conservatives in 2015, there was a candidate. Let's get into that, but anyway, just stupid stuff like that. Like, that's stupid, right? It can derail the entire campaign. Maybe it doesn't cost the election, but it costs a lot of heartache and pain, and a lot of resources, monetary and human resources, to try to manage and contain these problems. So you have to really strike a balance. And frankly, candidates will sometimes complain that they're being muzzled too much, and they probably are. But on the other hand, the poor guy that's running the campaign is going to have to deal with it when their idea, their offbeat idea, which they thought was so fantastic.
You have to make a list of all these kind of campaign foibles. I mean, I recall a campaign where the NDP candidate actually turned out to be a witch, an actual witch. So, I mean, there are, we could come up with a pretty colorful list.
In the 1993 campaign in the Reform Party, we had a cab driver running for us in Toronto who who was doing tours of satanic symbols around the city. And he
To each their own.
yeah, I guess it was a way he was an entrepreneurial guy. I don't know.
Well, that's one more question on the Conservatives provincially is the fundraising totals came out recently, and the Conservatives numbers were pretty flat, about half of what the NDP had done. Somebody suggested to me that the split of the one BC people leaving, some of the fundraising came from people really fired up by hot button emails. I don't know how that squares with your understanding, but what do the Conservatives need to do to get the fundraising back on track?
Well, I think that I think it would be giving the one BC people a little bit too much credit for saying they're responsible for that. I think that obviously you're right; they are fundraising on a few hot button issues. I think that in terms of the BC Conservatives, and I don't have firsthand knowledge of this, but my sense is that they're focused on other areas and haven't had as laser focus on fundraising as they could have had or should have had. But while we're here, Mike, the annual donation limit, I believe, is $1,575. That could be up $100, but you looking for your name on that list?
I'm a little short right
Little
now.
short at
Really sorry, it's been
$1,500.
tough. It's been a pretty expensive summer.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
still
put the appeal out to your wide, vast audience of
yes,
free enterprise.
duly noted. Duly noted. Well, Dimitri, I'm getting a little tuckered out here, so I think maybe we should head to the minibar.
Okay, I could use a drink right now.
So I warned you that you'd be coming to the minibar. You can raise a glass or take a shot, or you can do both if you want.
Wow, do I just get to pick one or a
No, you
list?
can do two. You can do both.
I was tempted to pick the BC health system for all of the emergency room closures that have happened over the last little while, and the increasing incidence of them, and the increasing difficulty in finding a physician and so forth. But I decided instead that I would instead have a shot on behalf of my friend, the education minister in Alberta, Dimitri Pantazopoulos, who is going through an interesting time right now when the government of Alberta is banning sexually explicit materials. The Edmonton School Board decided that Margaret Atwood was an appropriate material, and in order to try to fan the flame. Now, one could say that they did a bunch of school kids a favor of not having the kids suffer through a Margaret Atwood book. That would be some people's view, not necessarily mine. But Nicolaides and the premier came back and basically said, no, if you don't understand what sexually explicit material is, we'll make a list for you so that you will understand. So taking a tough issue and handling it well and sticking to their guns, I'll pick Nicolaides, my namesake, for a shot, as it were. Is that a shot? Is that the good one? Or
No, if it's positive, you raise a glass.
Raise a glass, sorry.
Yeah.
I know I take a shot when
raise a glass of ouzo, or
yeah, I know we take a shot when as a group. But okay, I'm raising a glass.
Raise it. Okay.
Okay. Screwed up. It's screwed up already.
That's fine. Is that all you got?
I guess I'll also raise another glass to the Whitecaps for bringing on Thomas Mueller. I was at the game, his first game the other day with our friend Christy Clark, and
you're sitting in my seats actually.
Yeah, it was Mueller's first day and on the field, and I think the energy level changed dramatically, and I think he's going to do a lot to bring excitement and life into the sport of soccer in Vancouver. And I say that as not someone who's particularly a soccer fan. I thought it looked like a really good thing for the city and for the game.
Yeah, no, it's actually a massive move for the Whitecaps and for sports marketing opportunity like they've never seen before. So we'll see how that pans out. Yeah. Well, I will raise a glass to Dimitri Pantazopoulos for finally coming on the show, but also about 15 years ago, the Christy Clark leadership campaign was in a bit of a spot where a certain unnamed vendor bailed out on us on short notice due to political pressure. And we needed someone to come in quickly, and we're led to Dimitri on basically 48 hours notice. You packed up a suitcase, came out to BC, and we won the leadership thanks in large part to your work. And then you joined the circus in BC for a few years until we got through the next election, and you just never left. So, Dimitri, thanks for emigrating to British Columbia. It's been a great ride, and I'm glad that this podcast finally allowed you to elevate yourself to a certain level of respectability.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that. Wow, I'm honored. I'm honored to have the glass raised and not be shot at.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us today, Dimitri. Thanks for checking in, I should say, to Hotel Pacifico. And thanks to our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and Fortis BC, and BCGEU. See you next week, BC. You can never leave.